Michael Kaskey Blomain covers the 76ers and the NBA for CBS Sports, and he is back for another look at the Sixers getting ready for the playoffs now. Michael, we don't know their playoff opponent, but we'll start with that. Of the four teams that are their possible playoff opponents, which team is the worst matchup for them?
If I'm the Sixers, Mike, I want to avoid the Wizards. I think the Wizards are the four best teams out of all those teams playing in the Eastern Conference play-in. They've gone, 10-5 over their past 15 games. They've been playing really better basketball since the All-Star break. Russell Westbrook is fully healthy. Bradley Beal's still dealing with a hamstring injury, but he's out there and he's playing. And to me, they would not necessarily give the Sixers a hard time, but I think that would be the toughest series for them in terms of, guys to go against. And I think, if you're the Sixers, you'd rather have, an opponent in the first round like the Celtics are banged up, the Pacers are banged up. The Hornets don't have a lot of experience when it comes to postseason play. So to me, I'd want to avoid the Wizards for sure.
All right, yeah. Now, of the four teams, who do the Sixers match up the best with?
That's a tough one. Probably the Hornets, I would say. I don't think the Hornets have really anybody that could come close, obviously, to defending Joel, which would be the issue for really any of these teams. But, the lack of experience on the Hornets roster, they're, really exciting and fun to watch. But between, LaMelo Ball, Miles Bridges, P.J. Washington, none of those guys really have been in the playoffs before. And we've seen, obviously, P.J. Washington can't guard Joel. Biyombo can't guard Joel Zeller. So, I think he would be able to have a field day, and, the rest of the team just wouldn't really be able to match up.
All right, so of the four teams, in your mind, Michael, who's the most likely opponent? How do you see the play-in tournament kind of going? Tonight you got Wizards and the Celtics. The winner of that game would play Brooklyn, and then the loser would have to play the winner of the other game. So who's the 7 and who's the 8?
That's tough, Mike. I think we'll probably end up seeing the Celtics and the Wizards get in. I think the Wizards will end up winning tonight to move into that 7 spot to play the Nets in the first round, like you just said. And then I could see the Celtics ultimately beating whoever they have to play in that second matchup to move into the 8 spot.
So it would be a Philadelphia versus Boston rematch from last year is how you kind of see this thing going?
Yeah, I think that's the most likely scenario.
All right, so let me ask you this then. Boston, who last year swept you out, I think a lot of people are looking at this team. They don't have Smart. This team has really struggled. What would a matchup of Boston and Philadelphia, is this a series that the Sixers should get through easily, or do you think this is kind of a long, Brad Stevens draws this thing out, he comes up with a plan for Ben Simmons and gives the Sixers some problems?
I just don't think the Celtics have the personnel this year, Mike. I know people love to toot Brad Stevens' horn for his ability as a coach and things like that, but you can only really go as far as your talent in the NBA. They're obviously missing Jaylen Brown. So much of the responsibility on the offensive end is going to fall on Jason Tatum's shoulders, and the Sixers have, a multitude of guys that they could throw at him, whether it's Ben, Matisse, Danny, all of those guys could alternate on Tatum. And outside of him, I just don't think the Celtics have enough firepower to match up with the Sixers really on either end. They don't have anyone that can obviously slow Joel. Tice is gone. Obviously, Al Horford's been long gone. So, the days where they had kind of the kryptonite for the Sixers, I think are kind of past. And to me, it's a situation where, Tatum and Kemba Walker could probably sneak a game, maybe even 2 from the Sixers. But at the end of the day, I don't think that series should go more than 5, maybe 6 games at most.
Michael Kaskey Blomain, NBA writer, CBS Sports, at The Real Mike KB on Twitter. Let me, how do you see a possible Nets-Wizards series going?
That's a series. It's kind of the reverse of what I was saying in terms of the Sixers having to play the Wizards. That's a team you want to avoid. If you're the Sixers, I think the best case scenario is that you get a Nets-Wizards series in the first round because, like I said, I do think the Wizards are the best out of those 4 play-in teams. I think they're a team that could give, anyone that they play in the first round, they could make it a difficult series, potentially take a game or 2. And then when you factor in the, kind of the storylines in that series, which would obviously be Russell Westbrook going up against Kevin Durant, the history there. Westbrook going up against one of the, his old buddy and former teammate in James Harden. There's just no shortage of storylines there. And again, I do think the Nets would come away with that series, but I think the Wizards would, make it tough on them. And I think if you're the Nets, that's not really how you want to start off your playoff run when you've been banged up. You've had guys in and out of the lineup. I think you'd rather have a series that's, a little bit easier for you. So if you're the Sixers fans, I think the best case scenario would be, that the Wizards go into that first round and play the Nets and make things tough for them.
Yeah, I think that would be a fun series. You get Westbrook against Durant. They've had their little beef going back and forth.
Yeah,
you got
sure.
Beal trying to score with Harden. I just don't know who's going to match with Kyrie. That would be the problem, is they don't have a third guy, but they have two guys every bit as willing and able to go mano-a-mano. I'm not saying that Westbrook and Durant are going to cover each other, but if Durant's going scoring buckets, Westbrook's going to want to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think that could be, an extremely exciting series. And on any given night, as long as Bradley Beal's healthy, he's capable of dropping 50. We've all seen what Westbrook has done. He can turn the game, with his ability, scoring, passing, rebounding, making plays for everyone. And, if those guys get hot at the right time, they could run off a game or two against anyone.
Michael, how significant is it in your mind, and how much does it change your outlook for the Sixers that they don't have to play Brooklyn, Milwaukee, or Miami until the Eastern Conference Finals, and they're only going to have to play one of those three teams in this entire playoff run?
Yeah, I think it's huge, Mike. I don't even think you can really overstate how important that is for this Sixers team that has, expectations, that's dealt with playoff disappointments in the past few years. I think to have, and obviously you can't overlook any of these teams. The Sixers can't go into the playoffs, looking ahead to the conference finals. That's not what I'm saying at all. But just to have a path that's laid out for you like that, is pretty much as easy as it could have been, the way things shaken out. I think it's huge. It'll give them an opportunity to, get themselves going in the first couple rounds, develop that playoff chemistry with the rotations and the way things are going. And then, hopefully you're clicking and you're at full strength and you're able to get through those first two rounds. And at that point, these other teams that are, the best teams in the conference, the Nets, the Bucks, and the Heat, have already beaten up on each other. They've already eliminated, each other in the first couple of rounds, and you're facing just one of those last teams. And at that point, if the Sixers are feeling good about themselves and they get their confidence high, you would have to think they have a great chance.
Michael, how do you, because this comes up all the time, teams are going to defend Ben Simmons differently. Once to the playoffs, the whole game's different. How are teams going to defend the Sixers differently in the playoffs? And specifically, are they going to defend Ben Simmons differently than they did in the regular season? And how can they do that?
Yeah, I think maybe slightly, Mike. I think a lot more, there'll be a lot more doubles and attention on Joel. There was a lot of soft doubling and traps and things on him during the regular season. I think in a postseason series, a team is going to try really hard to take away the outlet pass and potentially not even let him get the touches in the post that he got in the regular season that, he was able to become comfortable with. As we've seen in the past, I think a lot of that, the doubling will probably come from Ben's guy and things like that. I think it'll be really interesting. Obviously, this is the first postseason that the Sixers will have Doc Rivers, calling the shots from the sideline. And I think it'll be interesting to see how he decides to, go about this situation compared to how Brett Brown did in the past. I think he did a better job during the regular season of finding, spots for Ben, whether it's cutting off of the double teams or if it's putting him in the dunker spot or, running him as the screener in screen and roll situations. I think there's, a myriad of ways that you can still utilize Ben in the half court set, especially when Joel is being doubled, as Ben can be the guy that kind of gets the outlet pass from Joel and then looks to the corners for the other guys, kind of in like a Draymond Green type role that he did in Golden State when they would put a lot of pressure on Steph Curry. So things like that, to me, that's a great question. It's probably one of the main things, obviously, that I'll be looking for in this first series. Whoever they end up playing is just going to be, what Doc draws up to, when Joel inevitably faces the double and potentially even triple teams in these series, how he uses Ben and the rest of the guys to space the floor, around Joel.
Well, it seems, Michael, that if I'm a coach of another team, aren't I trying to figure out ways to make the Sixers secondary players, I'll let Danny Green and Seth Curry get open looks and see if they can beat me in the playoffs. Like, is that a good scenario or a bad scenario? Like, I'm doubling Joel so that he doesn't beat me. Let these other guys shoot it up. Or I'm going to sag off of Ben so that, he can't kick it out to the shot makers on this team.
Yeah, but I think the thing is this year the roster is built better for situations like that. I think George Hill will come in real handy in situations like that in terms of another guy that you can put in to initiate offense and knock down shots. Obviously, the shooting around Ben and Joel this year is infinitely better when you're just talking about Seth and Danny compared to obviously Al Horford and Josh Richardson last season. So it's a situation where in the past that was the main thing you would say I'm going to try to take the ball out of Joel's hands, sag off Ben, try to make some of these other guys beat us. But at this point, you have guys that, Danny Green's proven his ability to beat teams in the playoffs by hitting open shots. He has 3 rings to show for it. Seth Curry obviously has also shown that he's a guy that you can't sag off. So I think that's definitely going to be an approach that teams try. And at that point, it's going to be up for, to the Sixers players to knock down those shots. But I think this year the roster's built better to handle that than it has been in years past for sure.
MKB's with me. CBS Sports covers the NBA. Can teams sag off of Ben like they used to? Can they put that wall up and say, hey, go ahead and shoot it? And, of course, he's not going to. But because of the roster configuration, are they more equipped to handle that?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. That's kind of what I was getting at. I think the teams will definitely try that. There's no doubt that that's what we'll see. That's what's worked in the past. Ben still hasn't added that shot to his repertoire, consistently. So that's definitely what it's going to come down to. But I do think that, like I said, I think Doc has found better ways to utilize Ben even in those situations, whether he has him, slash into the hoop off of, Joel doubles, or if he's putting the ball in his hands, someone else's hands, and letting Ben operate as a screener. And I think it's just going to be kind of hard if you give him that space. Ben's gotten better, I think, at taking the space that's given and driving into the paint and making the defense collapse. And at that point, like we were just saying, there's, much better shooting surrounding those guys this year. So I think that's what teams will try to do. But, I think the Sixers are better equipped to handle it this year.
2-point game. You need a bucket late. You double Joel. Who gets that? Who gets the look?
I think it's got to be. I mean, obviously, it will depend on the situation. But the first thing that comes to my mind, Mike, is obviously Tobias. I think he's developed that reputation over the course of this year as he's been, the secondary closer. And like you said, it's tough for a big guy to be the go-to guy for a team down the stretch because, as opposed to a guard, they can bring the ball up, get it on the perimeter. Joel needs someone to deliver him that ball down in the post. And if they're fronting him and having a defender behind him, it's going to be really tough to get that ball into him. And at that point, we've seen time and again, I think back to the Lakers game at home earlier in the season, other times where Tobias at that point became the guy where he put his back to the basket, got a defender on his hip and hit those turnaround shots. So I think Tobias is going to be that secondary option if Joel's, taken out of the game.
Right. And I mean, I guess that's the thing is, can Tobias Harris, has he graduated from B-level player to an A-level player? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Late in the game, if you need a bucket, who gets it for you? If it can't be Joel, it's not going to be Ben. It's got to be Tobias Harris. He's going to have to be the guy that gets that big bucket. And the question is Tobias Harris that player? We're about to find out. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this is going to be a huge postseason for Tobias for exactly that reason. I think he graduated into that player during the regular season, but as you and I both know, Mike, that reputations and stuff in the NBA are made in the postseason, and defenses are going to be keying in on him, and it's going to be up to Tobias to show that he is that guy.
What do you do? Michael Kaskey Blomain's with us. CBS Sports covers the NBA at the Real Mike KB on Twitter. What are you doing with Tyrese Maxey's minutes?
I'm throwing him in there as a change of pace guard when the opportunity presents itself, Mike. I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to get consistent minutes. I think George Hill is going to be that first guard off the bench, and I think Shake Milton is going to be the second guard off the bench based on just the way things have shaked out. But I do think that there'll be situations, whether it's foul trouble, whether it's due to just the offense having a little bit trouble getting some offense. And I do think there'll be times where you kind of sneak Maxey in there for a few minutes. And we've seen that he's able, almost like instant offense, you put him in, he can do things that other guards on this team can't do. So to me, he's almost just like the wild card, if you will, for this team that I think there's not going to be consistent minutes for him, but there'll definitely be maybe a game or two where afterwards we're talking about how, wow, like Tyrese really came in that game and gave the Sixers a big boost.
Doc has said, Michael, that he will play 11. I don't think any of us believe that, but how many guys are going to be getting regular playoff minutes?
I believe him in as much as I think 11 guys will play over the course of the postseason. I don't think necessarily 11 guys will play in each game.
Right.
I think a lot of it will obviously be dependent on, matchups. One particular matchup, they might need more defense, and then obviously they lean into Matisse. Maybe they need more spacing in another matchup, and then you go with, Furkan, something like that. But I do think they'll go 10 deep on a nightly basis, Mike. Obviously, George Hill's going to get his minutes. Dwight's going to come in and play. I think Shake is a guy that's definitely going to see at least some minutes on a nightly basis. And then, a couple forwards. So to me, I think you'll see 9 or 10 guys, but obviously with the starters playing, increased minutes compared to the regular season.
All right, Michael Kaskey Blomain. Michael, if the Sixers don't get out of the second round, how disappointing would that be?
Very disappointing, Mike, especially like we were talking about earlier, the way the bracket really shaped up for them well. They worked this whole season to get that number 1 seed, and it's not a situation like in the West where you get the number 1 seed and you could end up having to play the Lakers or Steph Curry in the first round. The Sixers got this 1 seed, and they're looking at 4 teams that are just, quite frankly, not as good as they are, and it's the same situation in the second round when they play the winner that would play the winner of the Knicks and the Hawks. Both exciting young teams, neither of them as good as the Sixers. So to me, anything short of at least an Eastern Conference Finals appearance this season would be a very big disappointment.
Who is the 7 and the 8 in the West?
I think it's going to end up being – I do think the Lakers will end up getting that 7 spot, and then I think the Warriors will probably end up still sneaking into the 8 spot. I think they'll lose to the Lakers, but then end up beating the winner of that Grizzlies Spurs game.
Can you imagine being Utah and or Phoenix and having to face? I mean, you have 50 wins,
right?
And you're the 1 seed. You might face the Lakers as the 8 or the 7. I mean, that's just brutal.
Yeah, that's brutal.
Awful. All right.
Yeah.
Much different path in the West. Utah's path is brutal. If the Lakers are the 8, they would have to possibly beat the Lakers and the Clippers just to get to the Western Conference Finals.
Right, and that's what I was saying in terms of the Sixers. It's just, the way things shook out for the Sixers, it's so much easier. It's a clear path right to that conference finals, and it's, not a situation where they're going to have to play a future Hall of Famer in the first round like LeBron or Steph.
All right, Michael Kaskey Blomain, the NBA play-in games tonight on 97.3 ESPN. The Sixers will find out their opponent after Thursday night's games. They will play on Sunday against a yet-to-be-determined opponent. That Sunday slate, you're getting Philly, New York, probably L.A., and probably Golden State. So you're going to have 4 legit games on Sunday.
It's going to be a busy weekend for sure.
All right, MKB, good to see you, man.
You too, man. Talk to you soon.
All right, CBS Sports, Michael Kaskey Blomain, and, of course, he, like August, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. He covers the Sixers and the NBA nationally for CBS Sports, and he appeared here on the Sports Bash as he does every Tuesday for Inside the Sixers.